Hello, everyone. How are we this evening? Can you guys hear me okay? Can someone give me a thumbs up in the chat? Thumbs up. Thank you, Amanda B. Well, good evening. I was just describing to some of you my computer screen. Um, I dropped my laptop, and so my computer screen is cracked, and so I'm not sure what you're seeing or what you're not seeing, and wanted to make sure that everything was going well. This is Vocatio Talks. If you haven't joined us before, this is a 30-minute webinar where we will attempt to explore the connection between work and faith. I'm Dr. Ben Reese, and I serve as the Associate Dean for Vocational Formation here at Abilene Christian University. And I'm just grateful and honored that you've taken time on a Tuesday evening to join us here. And before we get started, we always do a few housekeeping matters. I'm going to share a few things over the first 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have time to do a bit of Q&A. The back end, at the bottom of your screen somewhere, should be a Q&A button. And if you have a question that comes to mind during your conversation, go ahead and click on that, submit it, and depending on how many questions we get, if we get any, we'll do our best to get to them in the second half of our time together. And in the past, people have submitted questions using the chat feature. However, what we've discovered is that those questions often become buried and it's hard to find them. So I really want to encourage you to just use the Q&A button if at all possible. So for the last two Vocatio talks, if you've joined us, I've done the introduction live, and then we turned to the actual talk that was pre-recorded. And then I would come back at the end live and respond to questions live. We didn't pre-record it this go around for a couple of reasons. First, while it allows pre-recording it, while it allows it to be a bit more produced for redistribution and broader viewership and long-term and all that other stuff, it isn't necessarily my preference. We're already dealing with the distance between us as we each sit in front of a computer screen, and it feels a bit inauthentic for me, and I'll always take authenticity over production. So that's the first reason. Another reason is that this is the fifth Vocatio talk that we've done, and there's something about this evening's webinar and the topic of this evening's webinar that felt strange to pre-record. We've covered a broad theme of work and meaning. We've talked about Sabbath, learning how to rest. We've talked about finding God in the little things. And as I approach this evening's topic of what does one do when their work feels meaningless, or what do we do when work is toil, or frustrating, tedious? What do we do when we don't like our job? It just felt strange to pre-record. So we're going with it live, and then we'll see where it goes. And if this isn't your first Vocatio Talks rodeo, if you've experienced both the pre-recorded and the live version tonight, I'd love to get your feedback when we're done with all of this evening, to get your sense of what you prefer, what works, what doesn't. Okay, enough of that. To the question at hand. What do we do when our work is not life-giving? I mean, what do we do when it feels far more like toil than joy? What do we do when we wonder if our work matters at all? When we simply clock in and clock out, feeling an increasing sense of disconnect in our work? So first things first, this is a reality for many of us. And many of us have felt it one time or another. And sometimes it's situational, that it will with time and changing circumstances pass. But at other times it's existential, right? It's a everlasting reality. There's no circumstance to change. It is what it is, and we're just stuck with it. And the feeling of work being toil can come from a bunch of different areas. Perhaps there's a circumstance outside of our work that's difficult and painful or hard, and the emotional toll of what's happening outside creeps into our work life. Perhaps it's an illness, either our own or a family member, and the emotional weight and concern of that illness pulls us away, makes it really hard to work. I remember when my brother-in-law was fighting cancer, and then a few years later when my stepmom was fighting cancer. I mean, that affected my work life. Right? Even though it was happening across the world, it took an emotional toll on me. Or perhaps it's a marriage that feels uncertain, or a relationship with a child or a parent that's gone wrong, or maybe it's a good friendship has somehow ended or become fragmented. Sometimes relationships outside of work affect our experience of work. Maybe it's a crippling depression or financial strain or world events or stuff that's happening in our neighborhood. Right? There are any number of things that have nothing to do with our work yet might affect our work in substantial ways. Or sometimes work is hard because we simply don't enjoy the people with whom we work. You have a boss that's overbearing, micromanages you, or has unrealistic expectations. Or maybe you just find them to be an unpleasant person. They're not kind. Perhaps relationships with colleagues isn't what you hope for. You wonder if you're the person in the office that no one likes. You don't find connection with others. Relationships in the workplace matter. And if those relationships are strained, it affects the work, right? So, just as outside stuff can affect our work, relationships in the workplace can also affect us. But sometimes the work itself is just life taking. We don't enjoy it anymore. We don't find it meaningful. It's boring or it's tedious. Perhaps you really wish you were doing something else. Work becomes a daily reminder that you're not doing what you really, really love to do. My brother is an accountant in Nashville, Tennessee, and he's grateful to have a good job. He's thankful for a paycheck. But every day, his work is a reminder that he's no longer doing the work that he loved doing for 9 years as a missionary and community developer in Togo, West Africa. That every day going into work, being an accountant is a small daily reminder of the work that he used to do that was so meaningful that is now a continent away. Literally, it's across the ocean. It's not touchable. Okay, so we're 10 minutes in and I've successfully made it a little depressing. At least I hope I've done a sufficient job of identifying the problem. That sometimes for reasons that are internal to the work itself and sometimes external to the work, our work just stinks. And when that's the case, what do we do? What do we do when we don't like our job? I want to give us a few things that might potentially give us a greater capacity to not only endure those times, but potentially get us to a place of greater connection and meaning. First things first, and this might not feel terribly helpful, but I think it's important. If you find yourself in a season where you don't like your job, know this, you're not alone. That most people at some point in their life find that their work is absolute and complete toil. In fact, many people, they go through their entire life never really enjoying their job. And this isn't entirely a misery loves company type of situation, but it is to say this: and we're not alone, and there really is nothing new under the sun. There will be seasons of summer, and there will be seasons of winter, and it's not always because we've done something or that the universe or that God is against us. It's that life is hard, and sometimes our work is hard. I've said it here before, and I'm pretty quick to remind people in any context that this conversation about work being meaningful and us feeling connected is pretty recent, and it's privileged conversation. But for most of human history, life existed to get enough food and water for the day and not getting eaten by a bear. Right? For most of us, and for most of human history, just getting through the day was enough. So if you find yourself in a long season of toil, remind yourself you're not alone. That sometimes just getting through the day is enough. Another thing that can be done, I think, is learning to practice gratitude. Okay, so this doesn't come easily for me. Uh, and in this, I'm preaching to myself as well as I'm preaching to you. But research has shown that gratitude benefits relationships. It benefits our mental health and our physical health. It improves sleep. It improves self-esteem. It enhances empathy and it decreases aggression. The people who describe their life with gratitude, they consistently report higher levels of satisfaction and quality of life. Now, again, I'm naturally a cynic, so being thankful doesn't always come easily for me. As Stephen Colbert once said, not only am I a glass is half empty kind of guy, I assume what's left in the glass is mostly backwash, right? So, during a pretty difficult season of life, my spiritual director told me to write down 3 things for which I'm grateful every morning. So every morning I woke up and I poured a cup of coffee and I wrote down 3 things I identified created gratitude in my life. My morning cup of coffee, a wife that occasionally laughs at my jokes, kids that I adore, steady paycheck, running water, shelter. And sometimes they were serious, sometimes they felt petty, but over time, what I found is that my life became a bit lighter. And things were still hard. Yes, I still hated my job. I found zero fulfillment in the work, but it was no longer the totality of my life. I had things in my life that were hopeful and produced joy and got me by. Without that really simple practice of gratitude, the dark cloud of my work at the time, it was covering and it was hiding those things in my life for which I cared deeply. So, the simplest and easiest suggestion I want to throw out is this: every day, take a few minutes, write down 3 things for which you're grateful, whether they're connected to your work or not. They don't have to be big, they don't have to be earth shattering or profound. They can be as simple as a cup of coffee or cozy sweater, but I promise it'll make a difference. Another really simple thing you could do is try to spend time reflecting on those parts of your work that you actually enjoy. And maybe it's not big, right? Perhaps it's just a task that doesn't feel terrible. Perhaps there's a part of the daily rhythm of your work that is the only solace in your workday. Perhaps it's something you used to do in your work, but you're no longer doing for one reason or another, but it might be possible to resurrect. But whatever it is, no matter how small, try to make room to do that one thing, or perhaps those 2 things, uh, for a bit longer. Identify what parts of your work you actually do like and spend a bit more time there. And it might feel like you can't afford the time to do those things, but I promise you, you can afford it. And whatever you might lose in focusing a bit more on something small that you like will be nothing compared to what you lose if you continue to feel increasingly frustrated or hopeless in your work. And in the same way, are there people with whom you work that you really enjoy? Find ways to connect with them more each day, even if it's a simple 5-minute conversation or being intentional about having lunch with them. Identify those who bring you life, make you laugh, or make coming to work bearable, and spend a little bit more time with them. So, one of those people for me is Dr. Peter Williams. He directs the Doctor of Education program here. We laugh often, we share stories. He makes coming to work enjoyable. I like my job, but Peter makes it that much better. And so I asked him what he does when he finds his work or a specific task meaningless or tedious or soul sucking. And what he said was great. He said he imagines those who might find joy out of the end product of the work in which he is involved. So he might hate putting data into a spreadsheet, right? But there might be a faculty member or a student who really appreciated that someone has not only compiled that data, but has organized it in a way that's accessible and useful. So while he hates doing that work, imagining those that might benefit from the work down the road, even if it's way down the road, makes the work a bit more bearable. This reminded me of volunteering in my children's elementary school. I loved volunteering. I loved reading with kids. I loved helping out with math. Even loved recess. I loved it all. But I loathed having to cut out pieces of paper and laminate stuff. And I know teachers need the help. And so there's part of me that wanted to help. I never complained about it. I never let on how much I hated it, but I hated it, despised it. And one day while I'm miserable and I'm cutting out these pictures and I'm laminating them of these people, another teacher walks into the workroom and she says, "What are you working on?" I said, "I'm just cutting and laminating." And she looks at what's laid out in front of me on the table, and she goes, "Oh, looks like they're talking about civil rights." And almost immediately, I was struck with the image of all of these well-known civil rights leaders covering the walls of my children's classroom, and their stories of sacrifice and justice, hope and love being told. And instantly, the work of cutting and laminating became a gift. It's a small one, but a gift nonetheless. So maybe in the tedium or the boredom or the meaninglessness of your week, imagining those who will be affected or delighted or touched by your work down the road might be helpful. So So these are all really small things. But I think powerful practices to help get us through those seasons when our work is toil. So finally, I want to say this. Sometimes our work is toil, our work being miserable simply means we might need to find other work. There might be times when it's not situational, it's existential. There's nothing we can do. And this isn't easy, it's not always quick. And opening ourselves up to other possibilities can often leave us vulnerable and uncertain with an overwhelming sense of insecurity. But it just might be the case that the current situation or even career is just not sustainable, healthy. We need to start planning what the next move might look like. And that's a longer conversation than we have time for. And for those who may have joined us this evening hoping I would answer that, I'm really sorry for your disappointment. But that reality that when our work is toil, it just might mean we need to find something else as something we should hold. Okay. Um, again, I don't know if any of this is helpful. Um, I don't know where you currently find yourself. I don't know if you're in a state of frustration or hopelessness or meaninglessness in your work. Um, I don't know if the drive into work feels like a long, patient, miserable road to tasks that you don't care about. But I do want you to know this. I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want you to know that there are probably small things all around you for which you can be grateful, and that the simple practice of identifying them might actually lighten the load. And I also know that if we look for the small things in our day to day work that bring life, even in the smallest way, and lean into them, we just might find the strength to not only simply get through the day and then do it all over again the next day. It might help us get to the other side of the winter season, the other side where we discover work as meaningful and hopeful and connected. I'm always struck in the story of Genesis, first book of the Bible, because I'd always thought that work wouldn't be in heaven. I just imagined that grass would cut itself. There wouldn't be any sort of labor. But in the creation account in Genesis 2, we find God giving Adam the garden to till and to keep. He gives him the job to name the animals. That work is a part of God's intent for creation. It's work as toil, work as hard, work as painful, work that comes by the sweat of our brow, that is a part of the brokenness of creation. And it's not God's intent. So wherever you find yourself, I want you to know that God cares about you, that God cares about the work that you do, and that my hope and prayer is that you'll find moments of life, moments of possibility, even in the tedious and boredom. So, my friends, do we have any questions? We have a few minutes left. Any thoughts? I'm on the chat, and so if you want to throw out, that's great. It is a gift to love a job, right? Well, I'm not a professor who makes everyone stay until the very end of class. So if we don't have any questions, consider uh, your life freed of 7 more minutes. All right, friends. Hey, I appreciate all of you. These webinars. Okay, so Michelle asked a question. So is there a Bible verse that focuses on positive meaning? I always think of Jesus saying in the Gospel of Matthew, do not worry, um, do not be anxious, consider the sparrows and the lilies. Um, Telling someone not to be anxious or not to worry. is is always striking to me because it's like, oh yeah, just like that, huh? Okay, I won't worry anymore. It's more difficult than that. But I do think the overarching story of Scripture, right, or even so, this is a little bit. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but thinking about the Exodus story, when God provides daily manna and water and direction, that they have no idea what the future holds, but it's this radical trust that all will be well. Um, it's not quite positive meaning, but I do think much of discontent and frustration at work often comes from feelings of uncertainty or not being valued or not having enough connection. Um, yeah, so anonymous attendee asks why we do this webinar and how often they are. We do this webinar every week zero, so the off week between terms. We do it every Tuesday night at 7, and we do this with the hopes of trying to provide a resource for a greater connection between work and faith. So every off week, I pick a subject title and sort of run with it. So this time I talked about what happens when our work isn't meaningful. I've talked about rest. I've talked about what it looks like to take 5 minutes of silence every day. So it's just an opportunity for us to explore faith and work a little bit closer. All right, friends. Grateful for you. Grateful for your work. And look forward to seeing you in 8 weeks. Some of you have just finished up a class and you're getting ready to do another class. Take this week and rest. Take this week and breathe when you would be reading, go on a walk, play a game with a friend. And so blessings. Last things, if you Google Vocatio Talks if you go to YouTube and you do Vocatio Talks, there should be a Vocatio Talks page and you could see the other 5 that we've done. So, all right, friends. Hey, be well. This is like the 3rd time I've tried to say goodbye. Grateful for all of you. Grace, peace, lots of rest to each of you. Peace.